So here we are once again for another engaging conversation, which is precisely one of Azimuth's World Foundation's goals. We want to engage our community through these talks and shed light on issues that are important, that are urgent, and that really need addressing. I'm Mariana Marques, Executive Director of Azimuth World Foundation, an organization dedicated to advancing access to public health and safe water, and promoting as well the balance between humankind and nature among indigenous and rural communities. And we're very grateful that Carson Kiburo found the time to talk to us about the many issues surrounding indigenous communities in Kenya. Carson is a member of the Endorois of Kenya. He's a youth leader and community organizer, a dedicated defender of indigenous rights with extensive human rights background. He's the executive director of Jamii Asilia Center, an indigenous-led NGO founded in 2019 to protect and promote the rights of indigenous peoples in Kenya. He's also a board member at Major Group for Children and Youth. And on top of that, he's also currently co-chairing the UN's Global Indigenous Youth Caucus. Hello, Carson. Good afternoon to you. You're in Kenya, and thank you so much for joining us today. We are really grateful for the privilege of having an Indigenous youth leader talk to us about the issues Indigenous peoples face in Kenya, which are many of them global issues that other Indigenous communities face in so many parts of the world. So first, I would like to start by asking you, when was it that you realized you wanted to work on promoting Indigenous rights?
Thank you so much, Mariana. I appreciate Azimuth World Foundation finding time to do this incredible work of shining a light on the communities that you work with, the networks, what they're doing, the incredible leadership on the grassroots level. And yeah, I'm mentioning grassroots level intentionally because that's where I found my calling. I was born and bred in rural Kenya. Then, of course, Kenya was underdeveloped, way underdeveloped. And of course, many of these issues I saw without even knowing the part of indigeneity. I knew that a lot of change needed to happen there. If our viewers can be able to see this, I have a scar on my left side of my forehead. I got it when I was a kid, around 7 years old. And it's linked to what I'm about to say, that it gave me the strong urge to make a change within my indigenous people's community. But then again, after seeing the struggle for our land rights, the elders, because it is as long as my age right now, a struggle that stretches over 50 decades since the government evicted our people from our ancestral land in 1973. And when I saw them fighting for our rights and being vilified by the government or by our neighboring communities, for just standing for our rights and for being who we are, I felt like, why aren't they being given enough space? And when we won the case against the government of Kenya in 2009, 2010, at the African Court on Human and People's Rights, I saw the recommendations from the court that they were incredible, and it would change our lives. It would change, including not seeing more youth or more children falling from trees or falling from rocks when they are trying to find water. That's what happened to me. And it inspired me to change this by the age of 7. And now in 2010, when I was now a young person in this community of the Endorois, I felt like I need to support my elders because it's been a long fight, and I saw the energy was running out. The energy levels were running out, and that the effect of assimilation was creeping in, and we're not being told. We were being told by everyone and anyone that we need to be together. Of course, we need to be together. Unity is a strong thing, but if unity that you're bringing disengages me from my ancestry or my language or my heritage. And so I started filming about the Endorois peoples just to shine a light and to change that narrative of seeing the mainstream media sharing our stories differently than than the history on the ground. I'll share something to end that question. Think about an idea that you had in school that was completely different from your heritage, or you read in a textbook that it disconnected you from your heritage, and you're being told this is the ultimate truth that's in a textbook. So I sought to change that. That's the story. I sought to change that. And when I was growing up, I always wanted to be either a journalist or a lawyer or an advocate so that I can speak for my people and to say the truth. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, Carson, as you're a spokesperson for your community, and you were just now saying that you did start to filming the Endorois tradition, and we've read that you were also filming oral traditions, which is one of your advocacy projects. But could you share with us also why is it so important of keeping these records of oral traditions? You already talked a little bit about the real story, which can be different from books, but if we could hear a little bit more what it really represents for you and your community.
That is very important. One of the names that I was given by my parents, my middle name, actually the name that you see right there, Carson Kiburo, I can trace to my 6th generation ancestor. So I felt like I am disconnected from that ancestor because I don't speak the language that they spoke. I don't see the culture, the rich culture, the millennia of rich ancestry present right now, because we've been told over and over with extreme westernization that is sweeping across the world that, for example, our way of worship is witchcraft. Think about that. Or that your way of dressing is uncivilized, or your way of speaking is uncivilized. So it challenged me, and I thought I need to bridge this gap. And so the importance is the intergenerational knowledge transfer. This millennia of knowledge, where is it going? And are we going to lose this? Are we going to lose our ancestry, our sovereignty, our food, our culture? So I thought of, why not preserve and transmit this culture? And it starts by just telling the stories, sitting with the elders, ask them the questions that no one asks them. So that is the motivation, to be a bridge to the future and the bridge to where we are right now and the past where we've come from.
I absolutely liked also what you just said about being this bridge, right? And between all that knowledge and the wise side that elderly have and the new things that the new generations can also bring. So I think that's remarkable to find these bridges and to be then a spokesperson. And that takes me to a question that, you do have an extensive training in human rights, both from your graduate education and also your very impressive experience with UN and also other international institutions. So how important is it for Endorois youth to be able to attend college and bring back this kind of experience to their communities? And also, do you think that do you feel like having Endorois graduates who promote recognition and appreciation of traditional knowledge in graduate research and policy making? How is that, how important it is?
This is very important. And I'm really grateful that you thought of asking this question, because the education that we do have in my community just not goes from the age of elders who are 60 years now and below. Those are the people who've gone to school, and it's not like they graduated. And so we see them struggling in relating to policy processes, for example. And remember, I said the huge influence of the the Western type of orientation, be it education, religion. That is, I said that before, but it's important to say this. It puts down the level of self-esteem of our people to know and to feel for who they are as a people. And so it's important when you go to school, you go through that process and you come back to decolonize and know that, this is who I am. I am an Endorois. For example, I am a Maasai. I am like these and these ethnic group. This is my background. I appreciate it. And these are the challenges of my people. This is the beauty of my people. This is a very great characteristic of my people. And with all these things in mind, if you've gone to school, you've gone to college, you've gone through paralegal training like myself. So the importance of that is that you will appreciate your past and the future of your people. And what will happen is you will be able to analyze policies that affect the people. The world is fast moving and we're part of the humankind. We're not isolated and we need to participate full swing to be able to self-determine our future, that is.
Well, Carson, thank you so much for sharing with us how important it is. So, maybe Carson, tell us a little bit about the current situation of Indigenous peoples in Kenya. Do you find the Kenyan government still feels solidarity among pastoralist communities as it did in the 90s when it read that Alashek could expose, the marginalization that Indigenous communities had suffered for so long?
Yeah, not really. The government still see us as a threat, which is wrong. We have other threats like Al-Shabaab, which is different ideology than this one. For us, it's about our future. It's about everyone, actually, literally, who lives in Kenya. It's about you as a person to determine your future. And so they don't see that. Even after promulgation of the Constitution of Kenya in 2010, the steps have been painfully slow. For example, there are very progressive legislations in Article 59, which they have created commissions. For example, the Ombudsman's Office, the National Gender and Equality Commission, the Kenya National Commission on Kenya National Commission on Human Rights. They're very progressive commissions and legislations that have been passed. But if you look at Article 56, mentions ethnic minorities and marginalized groups. But also, if you look at Article 100, and it states that the Parliament shall enact laws to look into the promotion of the rights of ethnic minorities and marginalized peoples. We're not even at the lowest hanging fruit of that legislation, which is a very strong piece that empowers, for example, the indigenous peoples. And so I would say we're still far from that because we're seen as a threat when we come together. But of course, this is a free country. The Bill of Rights in the Constitution, I should mention, is very progressive, empowers the citizen of this country, and it should stay that way because we are advocating for more legislations or enactments by the Parliament to be able to assist the indigenous people, to be able to help the indigenous peoples to achieve more self-determination. And just to mention that we see rulings from the High Court about developments in Kenya, where it involves these multinational corporations or even big companies, for example, from China or the US. And so we've seen some rulings from the indigenous communities asking for their participation in these development projects. And the rulings don't reflect an informed judiciary, so to say. Because if you look at the way they mention, for example, United Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples or ILO 169, it's not as informed as they should. So we're still a long way down the line. So that is the situation as we talk right now. But most Indigenous peoples are realizing that there are more powers in the Constitution of Kenya, and they're going to court. And the High Court right now is a progressive part of the judiciary of Kenya where there's much more hope.
What will be one or two main policies that you would like the government to implement that will help your community and other Indigenous communities in Kenya?
For example, the Community Land Act 2016 gives a lot of power to the Indigenous peoples. What is needed is the capacity development of these communities, or the Indigenous communities living in these rural areas or in the forests, to be able to understand and to be able to partake in this legislation. But most importantly, the government needs to ratify, for example, and to domesticate the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, because it's not only important to Indigenous peoples, but it is important even to the Kenyan state. And more so, it will anchor the Community Land Act 2016 very progressively, I would say so, because right now they need, for example, to appoint a community land registrar, for example. They do have registrars in other sections, be it in private property or anything else, but they have not done this one because, of course, they know that so many communities will come forward and participate in this, and some other piece of legislation that needs to be devolved. In Kenya, we have devolved system of governance. We do have county governments, and within the county governments, the government needs to build the capacity of for example, the legislations at the county government or the county level, where we have the county assemblies. This will help the rural communities where Indigenous peoples live to be able to participate in these rights.
Good. Well, that's remarkable, Carson. It's wonderful to see there's this step towards conversation and change. And a while ago, already in the beginning of our conversation, you briefly talked about when you were a young boy, fetching water. And our organization, as you know, it's really focused on providing access to safe water in communities around the world. Not only is a human right, and it really is important for health-wise, but also it has other sorts of impacts, in particularly economical impact, and also related also even with education. And how relevant are the issues of access to health and safe water and their dependency on a healthy environment to Kenya's pastoralist communities?
I like the way you put the question that water is cross-cutting because it touches on almost everything. And for a pastoralist, it's a way of life. And I started earlier by mentioning that story about my childhood. And I have seen that situation worsening and worsening. When I was 7 years old, we had gone to a dry riverbank, a dry riverbed in my community. So we had gone with my mother, and she was just right there doing some laundry, and we were playing with other kids. Of course, there are lots of stones, and I fell from a 6-foot tree, and I hurt myself, and I was in a coma for more than 12 hours. But that is not the story. So the story is I am here today, but there's still more kids who still fall into the same problem right now, be it they fell on by the rocks or by the stones who were trying to get water. And the situation is worse right now. And as we head into the more drier season, January and February, it's going to be much more worse, much more drier. And for us as a pastoralist community, it is very difficult because the dry lands and the pasture is diminishing day by day. And we've had to cut down because of this effect of climate change. we've had to cut down the number of livestock that we do have, and that affects our our way of life. And we've seen also fights among some communities that live alongside my community, and we're being pushed to lose much more land than we used to be. Remember that I'm saying that for us, it's community land where we partition, the elders partition, they close a certain part of the land and say, for this season, we used to graze. And for this season, we will jump to this season, to this field, and we will go to the next field. So for the protection of biodiversity. And right now, because we are losing that biodiversity and the ecological ecosystem more than before, we see a breakdown. We see rural-urban migration, and our people are losing their cultures, they are losing their livelihoods, their lifestyle, and everything. And so to link back to water, it is affecting the health, it is affecting the life of our mothers or of our women, because they are the ones who bear the brunt more than, for example, the men, because men would go take care of the livestock, and they leave women with the young kids, for example, and to fend for the entire family, to get water, to do all these. It doesn't mean that also the men are not undergoing the hard time, but the women and the young children undergo this more than anyone else, and they need of dire help more like in an urgent way. But most importantly, these ways would be to help them to adapt and to stay resilient in these uncertain times, in this most defining time of humanity, that is within the climate change discourse. And we are now moving towards smallholder farms. We're doing now agroecology or agropastoralism. But most importantly, over the last 5 years, we've seen an exponential rise in water levels within our lake systems, Lake Bogoria and Lake Baringo. And lots of our people have been displaced, and we've lost public facilities like health centers or schools or playing fields, and most importantly, even cultural centers where we used to celebrate our cultures of our people and everything. And so, like I was saying, we need to stay resilient and to be able to carry this heritage to the next generation. But if doing that, we're crippled and we'll not be in a position to be able to help ourselves.
And you did touch a very important thing about also how the climate change is impacting in particular Kenya and the lands we're living. Not only you have the pressure of climate change, but then unfortunately also have the pressure for the extraction of natural resources, because then unfortunately what we've seen is that indigenous communities then are the first ones to suffer from all this, and it's quite unfair. And I would like to talk about how important is the work that your organization is doing as well. You co-founded the Jamii Asilia Center in 2019 to promote the rights of indigenous peoples in Kenya. What led you to start this organization?
The inspiration has always been volunteering. My team, I do have a team that they've been listed on our website, but I have one very important member of that board. His name is Barasa, Washington Barasa. And we thought of ourselves, we had this conversation and like, why things are the way they are in my community or in a neighboring indigenous community, or why do we see the gap between, for example, those elders who've come before us, they fought the fight, they won some, they lost most of it, and they're running out of energy, and there's no bridge between them and the next generation. So I thought, I need a vehicle that would understand this. And he also told me that he thinks the same way. And we put down our goals and our vision, and it was incredible. And we had more colleagues joining in, and we created and we registered Jamii Asilia Center to do this specifically, just to amplify the voices of indigenous peoples in Kenya, not only the Endorois. And so it is indigenous-led because I am an Endorois, and it is youth-led because I am still a youth, I'm still a young person right now. But most importantly, it's way beyond just being youth-led because it's serving the entire community. And we have women in the board who are very vibrant human rights defenders, and we have staff who are human rights defenders as well. And they're very, I would say, exceptional advocacy officers doing their incredible work. We're just supporting everyone, the elders in these communities. We will work with them. We work with the international partners. We work with community-based organizations just to do that specifically, to empower them with culturally sensitive solutions to their socioeconomic and political well-being as indigenous identifying peoples.
Thank you, Carson. Maybe if you could share more your thoughts about how important it is to have an Indigenous women program at JAC.
I believe in this, that for me to talk about meaningful youth engagement, for example, I am a youth, and that means that I am well suited to do that. What about women issues, for example? So women issues means that women issues are better advocated for or led by women. And so they understand. And I remember I mentioned that culturally sensitive solutions. And so women program is coordinated and led entirely by women. They help in the design, implementation of these programs, which are entirely for women. And so for us, we just complement that incredible leadership of women in my community. It's I am so glad that even my community recognizes that international fact, which is agreed even in Sustainable Development Goals, that it's good to have those people that you're talking about to be on the table. The message is home when it is led, what is designed by, implemented by, and completely led by women.
One of the main focus of your organization is climate change and biodiversity. And your organization did a serious research work, and you said that before, on the rising water levels in the lake systems of the indigenous Endorois and also Ilkamus, if I'm saying the name right, in Lake Bogoria and Lake Baringo. Do you feel like many issues affecting indigenous communities in Kenya are aggravated by the lack of data gathering and analysis?
Yes, I absolutely agree with that question. There's less and less research on these areas, or when it is done, it's not disaggregated to indicate that these are indigenous peoples, and would just say that this research was done in this county or in this district, but it doesn't say expressly say, for example, that this is an indigenous community, this is an indigenous people's land, or a people. But the challenge is most of the research that is done were being bypassed. You see, I mean, research organizations who come to our communities, do research, and go away with our data without paying attention to data privacy or free, prior, and informed consent, which is the basic minimum for indigenous peoples, for example. For research, it's important that research NGOs or research companies or research entities should involve our people by free, prior, and informed consent as a very important component of self-determination. And there is less and less, and we welcome more research into our communities to fuse this modern science with our own indigenous science.
Hopefully, our organizations are listening, and more they will pay attention to that. Azimuth, we see ourselves as an ally organization to indigenous and rural root causes and issues. It's about being an ally, exactly this, the organizations being allies and help indigenous community organizations like Jamii, Asilia, and others, and even the communities, and to have a collaboration to help and not impose. I hope that, we can still see more and more these organizations, like you're saying, to work closely and it has allies with indigenous organizations. It's important that above all that we listen what indigenous peoples have to say. Carson, going back still about this research that you did, and it is very important research that you did regarding the both lakes. Did it impacted any government policy, your findings?
Yes, it did, but we were not credited, sadly. Yeah, it did, because once we embarked on this research, we wanted the partnership. We badly wanted the partnership of the government, but of course we are non-governmental, and we sent out letters. We went to them, their offices, booked appointments, told them what we were about to do, went to the community, told them that this is where we can partner on. But then they just backtracked and they let us do the work, the heavy lifting. And once it was done, we shared the report as well, because it's not like we were duty bound to do that, but we shared our reports to government agencies, other NGOs, the community, because it wasn't our own research as well. Of course, we honed the process and the publishing of the document, but it was a lobby document coming from the two indigenous communities from where I come from, where I come from. We are happy, but we're not happy as much, because we wanted to begin this process, for example, with a memorandum of understanding and bringing our people and doing this. So we see how reports being stolen and not being used well. We've learned our lessons. Probably there was a process that was skipped. Probably we should have published very well in a journal, for example. But to answer your question, it was helpful for my community, for the neighboring community, the El Chamos, and the entire Baringo County, to do that case study, and how people feel like they felt that having their children do this on their behalf was very important for them. And so that's where we are. It helped them. It's helping the government to share policies. We're being called to some few meetings here and there to share those findings, but it is effective. It's being effective because we endeavored to do this to benefit our people, whether through us or by anyone else.
Well, it's unfortunate that that didn't happen. The acknowledgements. Hopefully, we will see more of that in the future. That your contributions, will be validated. Okay, so we still are living this pandemic, right? We aren't going to the third year, unfortunately. And all the inequalities that still exist if we think about vaccinations and how they're being distributed. And also at the same time, governments, put in place, a lot of restrictions and lockdowns, and that had a huge impact, especially when it comes to in many countries with tourism. But how did it impact the pandemic, in particular your community? Because it's not only the restrictions and also all the lockdowns, but also around the world we've seen a surge of human rights violations around the world. I'm not talking in particular in your country, but it's something that it's been witnessed around the world from all sorts of countries. So, but I would like to hear from you, how did a pandemic impacted your community? And what are the takeaways that your community has learned from all this?
Just like any other community in the entire world who are members of the humankind, we were worried that we were going to be wiped out of the face of the earth, and we didn't know what it was. So many facts were flying around, but most importantly, a lot of improper information, I'd say misinformation, was also going around that fed into a lot of misconceptions. And so our people created a fear to go to hospital when schools were closed. Like families were staying now with their kids full time, something that had never happened before. And so we saw a lot of indisciplined cases, or we lost a generation of young women into teenage pregnancies, and they couldn't go back to school. Their lives were destroyed. And even if they go, it's not like as it used to be. And even for young men, they engaged in improper behaviors, became criminals or violations within the law, and massive lost jobs happened around here more than anywhere else in the world. And so we lost a lot that we don't know when we will recover. But most importantly is, for example, for women health. Most of our pregnant or expectant mothers feared to go to hospital. And it's just recently that they started going to the hospital to be attended to. And we lost some women and a lot of babies, sadly. I'm talking about my community, so they are affected heavily. And of course, it goes without saying that my community could not do lots of its festivals or ceremonies that are very important to our cultures because of the pandemic again. And so, or even some had to be done within a wrong season where there's no food, not enough food, because people, it also coincided during a time that there were not enough, we didn't have enough food. And so those are the challenges that we experience, and we still experience today. Of course, with the other challenges like the climate change now as a continuing threat to our livelihood. The government also thinks that they do have a responsibility to get more taxes or something, and they still continue doing that because they believe a lot of people went to digital business, which was a vibrant technology, which was a vibrant market in Kenya, but indigenous communities are largely rural, and they're yet to tap into that market as well. So there's lots and lots of overarching challenges that continues to affect our people during this time of the pandemic. The vaccine reach is still far from that reach. I would say that we may not be, it may not be as fertile as anywhere in the world around here, but of course we're losing the elders at an alarming rate. And the elders around here is oral tradition. And so losing the elders is the latest loss that we have seen, and it's affecting our people heavily. And they've not been vaccinated. I come from a tourist site, that is Lake Bogoria and Lake Baringo, where we used to get a lot of tourists before the pandemic. And since the pandemic, we've never seen that. We were expecting that this December to January, when you guys are experiencing extreme cold, this is the time that you usually visit Kenya or Africa or any tropical place. And we were expecting that this was going to be the time. Unfortunately, you can't come because of the new strain, for example. The tourism industry is big around here. We do have amazing places to visit, but that is also falling on the rocks. And so that means socioeconomically, we're down. Last but not least, our people were not able to, and were still not able to participate in policy processes of the government because we cannot have large groupings to discuss policy processes or frameworks that affect our people. And we've seen some affecting the free, prior, and informed consent. They call it around here, they call it it's like a consultation. You get to the people, ask them, we want to bring this dam, for example. But now we see the government just coming directly and saying, in the pretext of COVID, we couldn't meet with the people, but we need this development right away because they've signed some concessions about loans and anything, and they want to bring the money. And we just happen and we see, oh, there's a big dam going on, there's a big river, there's a pipeline, for example, or water line cutting through villages that we were not told about. And so those are the effects of COVID regime.
Well, Carson, thank you so much for sharing with us the struggles that you're facing with this pandemic as well. I think it's important for us to hear what is happening, in different parts of the world and how the damage that this pandemic has been creating, in particular in indigenous communities, and how difficult it is, the daily life. But, we're finalizing almost our interview, Carson. I think we've been having just a great conversation. I still have, 2 or 3 questions before we end. And one actually has to do, when I introduce you to in this conversation, when I make your introduction, I also shared with our audience that you also co-chair the UN's Global Indigenous Youth Caucus. Why is it so important that Indigenous communities come together to advance Indigenous rights? And how has contact with Indigenous activists from all over the world helped you shape your activism?
It's important to start answering that question by saying that Indigenous peoples' rights are collective rights. It's we and governments have a struggle with that, understanding that, and even defining who are Indigenous peoples or the indigeneity as well. So there is power in numbers. We are distinct populations, for example, and we draw our connection to ancestral lands or our way of life, which is the most important thing. Our spirituality, the biodiversity, and link to nature. And when I participated in international frameworks, I learned that we are distinct, but we are large in numbers. And there's a lot to learn about the world. Meeting allies here like yourself, for example. I know we've never met, but I've met people, incredible people like yourself who support the Indigenous peoples. I learned that there's power in having the numbers, people who support you, who support your cause. They have challenges as yourself. You're not the only one. So it was therapeutic to learn, to know, and to be able to be educated. Most importantly, I feel like it has been an apprenticeship journey. I felt like a young blacksmith learning to sharpen a spear, for example. That's a way of our people of expressing that. So they say an iron sharpens another iron. So it's been a learning process, learning from those who have come before us, learning that there are people who have gone through, for example, the scourge of colonialism way before us, 500 years ago. And they've been fighting to sustain their cultures. And it's important when I tell this to my people, they're like, they feel incredible as well. And I do have an amazing team that keeps me on toes as well, showing me the way and not to lose my way from our people, because that link is very important. And that international link is very important as well, because it's important that this movement stays strong and we continue to fight, for example, for Mother Earth. We continue to fight for our rights, for the existence of this planet. If you look at the people in Amazon fighting for the existence of that ecosystem, that is thousands of millennia that still exists, that for us we've lost, for example, through migration or other things like you've mentioned, extraction of industries and the money markets. You see all these overconsumption and production models that has changed the world. I've learned all those and I've seen them. And so some validates my points or my ideas or my elders' ideas or my colleagues' way. When I joined the Indigenous Youth Caucus, it was an incredible experience seeing young leaders from across the world, from all the 7 corners of the world, from Australia, from Arctic, from Amazon, from Abya, for example. Abya is from the Panama area all the way to the Amazon, from the Pacific. People, we share the struggles, we share the challenges, and most importantly, we share that distinct definition of indigenous peoples.
And Carson, you were also recently in Glasgow for the COP26. What are your thoughts on what was achieved at the conference?
The single most important thing that was achieved, I would say, for me as an indigenous rights advocate or a rights activist, is anchoring the human rights text in Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. When I say human rights, it's not just indigenous peoples, but we draw the same rights inside Article 6 that have been now anchored from the Glasgow Pact. And so to me, over 3 years of hard work, I wasn't there during the last 2 COPs, but I was there in spirit, of course, offline, reading and learning the process. And when I went to COP26, it was sort of, I would say, learning by seeing and learning by sitting behind our lead negotiators, for example. So I learned a lot about drafting, all those texts and why it was important to retain Article 6.2 and 6.4 of that Paris Agreement, which is the human rights text that indigenous peoples draw from. We saw the G20 or these rich nations pledging, and these big corporations pledging 1.7 billion of the 100 billion climate finance. But so it's a big step because it was pledged for indigenous peoples, but also there's a challenge in that who are indigenous people. So the fight continues. We're now going to loss and damage in COP27 in Egypt. So there's a lot to be done. I would say I am cautiously hopeful out of COP26.
Thank you, Carson. So my last question, Carson, is how can organizations such as Azimuth World Foundation or even individuals to become better allies for indigenous issues? How can we, improve? How can we engage? Would you share with us?
Yes. And thank you for inviting me to this interview. I can't mention that enough. I have to always say that, because this is one way of having allies just like yourself, Azimuth World Foundation, reaching out to rural communities and indigenous-led NGOs or civil society organizations that work with indigenous-led organizations. And this is the most important way to build partnership. And the one thing that I would say beyond now here is it's important to engage the indigenous peoples from the design to implementation of your programs or your activities, because that way you have a proper partnership where you know the challenges. Like right now, we've shared some challenges, but of course, building on their past experiences, their challenges, and what they want for their communities is very important, so that you engage them from program design to implementation. And now you see them flourish. But it's important that you work with indigenous-led communities more than indigenous-led sub-granting organizations, because we have the capacity and we know how to talk about our issues. I guess that is what I was trying to achieve by saying meaningful participation. It helps a lot when you work from the start to the end, and the indigenous peoples will appreciate that the most, more than anyone else.